Welcome back to the last clinic tonight for NMRAx here in April. Our next guest has been 3D printing for more than 6 years. He has been doing it professionally for 4 years and has worked for some of the biggest names in the industry. Guess what? When you look at his photo, I'd like to introduce, with making 3D printing less intimidating, all the way from Tallahassee, Florida, Logan Zimmerman.
Hey everybody, how are you doing? Thanks for having me on, Speed, and thank you everyone else for letting me come and chat with you all for a little bit. On this clinic, basically going to a handful of train shows. I went to the Amherst, one of the larger train shows from what I understand in your guys' industry, as well as one of the Southeast region at Plant City. I took some time since I worked for both of these companies as I was going around chatting with people in the space and in model railroading to find out some people, the reason they haven't been using more 3D printing tools in their modules is that they kind of don't know where to start. And I was a little shocked because I know a few people that 3D print in model railroading and they seem to know what's going on and said it's been catching on. But when I went to a place where there were just tons of people coming out to show off their layouts and show off some of the stuff that they've created, there isn't a ton of 3D printing. Even at the Amherst show, I was surprised there was a few less booths than I thought there might be, considering the application that the tools have for your guys' hobby, passion. I don't want to downgrade it anyway, so please forgive me. But what I want to talk about, though, is how I think 3D printing is applicable, as well as like where to start, because it seemed like that was a general theme that typically the only reason people hadn't been using it already for their layouts and to create more unique modules is just they didn't really know the basics, where to start, and what, it's just intimidating. And you'll see some of that in this. So I'm going to try and do my best to make it as simple as possible and simplify what can be an overly complicated way of doing things. It's a new, novel approach to manufacturing. It allows people to have decentralized manufacturing. You guys can create whatever you want in your homes. You can create things for each other, and you can do it out of your garage, out of your workshop. So let's dive in a little bit. On here, I wanted to show you that we have the Multi-Layered Concepts website. That is my own small business. It's the one that I'm moving into the 3D printing space with. I've had my own LLC for 6 years now, and I'm going more from a broad, like buying and selling products, to leaning more into the 3D printing since I've had the chance to be in the space. So let's talk a little bit about where to get started. So if you want a 3D print, there's some first things that you need to know. And I'm going to kind of go with, if I were to restart this, knowing what I know now, and guide myself through how to get started in 3D printing, that's kind of the approach I took when it came to this presentation. When I first started, it was one of those things that I kind of didn't know what it was about. I kind of just wanted to see what a 3D printer could do. I just was going to do it for fun. And I found out that there's actually a lot of pitfalls if you don't know what you're doing or where to go. So my goal here is to kind of accelerate your learning in terms of, like, you can just kind of do the things that I'm mentioning here, and it'll save you potentially a year plus worth of diving in and learning and testing and sampling. So one of the first things that I think you guys need to do is download a slicer program. You need model files and things to print, and these model files are called STLs. But if you have the slicer program, they're free. And the reason why I think you should start here is because it gives you a chance to tinker with 3D printing. It gives you a chance to take a look at kind of what the file will look like, how the printer is going to move around to build the design, and it'll give you access to settings like temperature settings, the width of the extrusions, and the different things that the printer needs to be capable of. So my approach here is, if you take the slicer and all the information that you get from putting the model that you want into it, it'll kind of help you isolate what things you need your printer to do. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But the first thing, you can get free slicer from Prusa3D.com. You can use the Prusa slicer, and what you're going to do is import a model, and I'll show you a picture in the following slide about that. But like I said, it'll give you the parameters of your project, and you can look at what temperature do you need for different types of plastic. So in the slicer, you can select the plastic type, you can select some settings. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So on this page, and I don't know if y'all can see my cursor here or not, but let's pretend you can. In the top right, you have the print settings. So this will tell you kind of like what layer height you need to use. You can select the filament in a drop-down box on that second menu down, and then you can select your printer profile. And so there's a lot here when you're looking at the screen. You have infills and supports, and these things matter down the road, but there's a few rules of thumb, and I'll try to making models, not necessarily items that require certain types of loads or certain types of deflection. Here's like, what quality can your profile of your printer do? So you can go into this software that you can download for free on Prusa.com. You can select the printer or go through the wizard and put in multiple printers, and then you can kind of look through the settings and see what they're capable of doing. And you can just buy a printer, and we'll talk about the printers that I recommend in a second. But the thing that's important is kind of getting familiar with this software, because this is like 80% of what you're going to be interfacing with in terms of, you know, getting your print started and being able to manufacture your own parts. So this slicer program and kind of going through the settings, knowing how to set up a print, knowing how to enter a printer in is like the most complicated part, I'd say, in terms of getting your prints going. But once you have some things established and you have a process set up, and you can think a little bit like what we call process engineering. Basically, recipe is another term that they use in process engineering for, like, basically just like if you were baking a cake or something, you have ingredients, right? I'm going to use PETG plastic. It needs a certain temperature setting, so it's like 230 degrees Celsius. And we're going to run at these certain speeds, which, like I said, the stock speeds are fine in the slicer. So if you use the right recipe, your print should go off without a hitch. The only other thing being there is some mechanical things to consider. One being the cleanliness of your build plate. Your prints can stick or not stick, or they have adhesion or no adhesion based on how dirty they are. So there are some mechanical things that you'll have to do and learn as you go. But like I said, for the most part, to try and make this a little less intimidating, get the slicer program. You can do it before you ever buy a printer. Play with it, learn about it. And if you feel comfortable about how to use or utilize this software, the rest of the stuff's going to be cake. So the second thing you'll have to think about in terms of what you need for 3D printing is some kind of online repository or CAD program. So the online repositories are just a place that you can go and search for models. I mentioned earlier STLs. Those files are the type of files that you'll need. OBJs are another one, an object file. It's basically the 3D representation of what your printer is going to bring into the physical world. So if you go to something like Printables.com or Tinkercad.com, or sorry, Thingiverse, these two you can search for model railroad, things that people have already created. You can search for, you know, trees or flowers or something that, you know, may be relevant. The only problem is the repository is only as good as what the community is sharing with the company that hosts the repository. So if you need specific things to model railroading, they may not have a huge, robust, depending on which one you look at. And that's where a CAD program would come into play. Tinkercad is an easy one to get started. It's kind of like playing with digital Legos. You have shapes. You can combine the shapes. I've already been on Tom's Trains and things and kind of talked a little bit about like Tinkercad basics. So if you wanted to learn a little bit about that, you could go there. But YouTube is also chock full of explanations and tutorials, and I'll even be making some more like basics of 3D printing and how to get started tutorials. So everything we're talking about today, next month I'm going to be spending some time creating like how-tos and just basically where to get started and trying to break it down and make it as easy as possible to get started. And then from there, people can go on their own journey. So printables.com, thingiverse.com, you can search something that someone else has already created. If you want to learn how to do the CAD, you can create things yourself, and that will require a little bit more knowledge. However, that's like the artistic side of 3D printing. And once you learn how to model, you can create just about anything that you want, and you can make your layouts really unique. So things like signs, I made some demo signs that I took with me to one of the train shows that I went to, like a highway sign that you would see. Bridges and things like that. A lot of those already exist, but if you wanted something specific, you could learn to model those pretty easily. Certain smaller structures, like there are things you can that are very simplistic geometric shapes that you can create yourself. And then especially, from what I understand, a lot of you guys are very handy with what we call post-processing, but would be like sanding, painting, and beautifying models that you've sculpted or created by hand. You can use 3D printing to get you 90% of the way there, and then you can do the rest of it with traditional methods that you're used to. So I want you guys to start thinking of a 3D printer more along the lines of it being a tool and something that you can utilize. Not that it'll do the whole job for you, because there are ways to do that, but to get multicolor prints to be just beautiful and structurally perfect, it does take a bit of time to get there. But if you were to make kind of the bare bones of your object, then you can finish it by hand with things that you guys have already done. So that might be one way to make this thing less intimidating, is to think of it as you're making components or pieces for things that you've already done. And then as you get better, you can go maybe 70% of it done with a 3D printer, 30% by hand, then 80-20, 90-10, right? So Tinkercad and Fusion 360 will help you do that. Like I said, Tinkercad's kind of like digital Legos. Fusion 360 is the CAD more along the lines of like a professional. You make 2D drawings and you extrude them. And takes a little bit more knowledge to utilize that program. So this is an example of the Printables repository. So if you can see on the left-hand side, there's all these categories. There's art and design, costume and accessories, healthcare, household, sports and outdoor, tabletop miniatures, world scans. So there's things that you can go and search around for and see if things that you want already exist. If you want something in the real world that's popular or a known, like a memorial or something, some of these are already created. So if you look up monuments and things like that around the US, there's a chance that those are already modeled. And so if a vendor, and this is kind of a thing I was talking with people about at the shows, I was finding out that one of the pain points you all have is that vendors don't always have a full library for the things that you want. They might have bits and pieces, and you all dive in and learn so well about the history of things and different variations and versions of things that were created. And a vendor might come along and give you one version, but not have version, BCD. And so 3D printing gives you the ability to create kind of those holes in maybe some of these different things that you want to put in your layout. So if there was a certain fire truck that nobody has created and it was only made in the 60s, and I'm making this all up, I'm BSing this, by the way, But if there's something like that that doesn't exist, you could always go and create it. And there are some ways that the digital files, like you can pull in maybe a 2D image of the thing you want to create, and then you can use the software to help you get it started. And the tools are getting stronger, and they're starting to adopt AI to help make pieces of it or get you close. There's photogrammetry apps where if you have a real world thing, like let's say you wanted to put your own car, you have something that you've custom made yourself and put a lot of work into it, you can take photos of it from every angle, upload it to software, and the software will create a 3D image that you might have to clean up a little bit. But if you have a truly custom thing and you want it to be in your layout, there are ways to do that. And right now we're in a baby industry in 3D printing, so these tools will only get better as the years go on. And it's already kind of neat, the stuff that they can do even today. So this is kind of a little version of one of the little workspaces that I have in Tinkercad that I'm just putting a bunch of random stuff I was helping people with. But there's a components for a little award. There's a little bookmarker. There's a holder for sanding belts for a belt sander. Buddy of mine wanted a toothbrush canister for traveling that he was doing. So there's just all these little things in here that, with Tinkercad, I've created just by you literally like playing with Legos. You see on the right, there's all these shapes, and you can take the shapes and use them to combine. You can remove shapes from one another. You can add shapes together. There are some shape generators. So some of the text, you can do shape generation with that. There was also ways to import SVGs. So like a scalable vector graphic that you can get from, if any of you know how to use something like Adobe Illustrator or Inkscape is the free version of that. You can get the transparent images and pull them into Tinkercad. And so this, on the first, second, and third, those letters is a font that kind of matched the Trivia Night Award I was making. The whole thing was based on like a neon sign on their logo. So this was like neon lettering as a font. So I was able to pull that font in and extrude it and combine it with the regular 1, 2, 3 that exists in the app. And then you have the first, second, third toppers that we put on there. So there are ways to use kind of multiple programs together, but the basics or gist of this is that you can take a cylinder and add it to a sphere. And you can, create a microphone, let's say, by using a cylinder, making it tapered, and putting a ball at the end, right? For oversimplification. So that's outside the scope of what this is today. But if you wanted to go take a look on YouTube or take a look at Tom's Trains, there's some kind of basics of how to get started with this. So step number 1, get the slicer, get familiar with kind of what your needs are, right? The filament types, the printer type. 2, find a model on a repository or get into Tinkercad, take a class, and kind of figure out how to play with it, and then just start making stuff. This is all before you even commit to a printer, because they can be expensive. If you get the wrong one, they can break and have issues. And I've met plenty of people that have had a printer for a year or two that is just sitting on the sidelines because something happened. They didn't know enough about it, and the community didn't quite have the right solution. And after chatting with them for about 30 minutes, I was able to help them figure out what the problem is and get their printer going again. And it just takes a little bit of the right kind of knowledge. But before you even start, I would say size up your project, size up what you want to do, verify what you need the tool for. My biased opinion, everyone should get a printer and just start figuring it out. But I've had plenty of people tell me that the way I think is like a solution looking for a problem. I want to have all the tools. I want to know how to do the stuff. And then I want to go find people that I can help with those abilities rather than, here's my problem. What are the right tools to fix it? It's like, no, let's learn something cool and then go find people that need help. So my bias would be you do that approach and have fun with it and pick it up and just see kind of what the possibilities are. So this is just overview, kind of a screenshot of what a Tinkercad messy workspace looks like, and just kind of things that you can build and put together. And again, this is the more creative side of 3D printing. But if you find stuff that already exists in a repository like Printables.com or Thingiverse, then you can just import it in and set it up in your slicer and send it to print. All right, so material type. One of the things that you need to understand is just kind of the types of printing and the types of materials. They all have different use cases, and we're going to try and simplify this and break it down to help you understand kind of what the easier materials are to work with, and maybe some of the slightly harder materials to work with, but have certain strength benefits, have certain heat tolerance capabilities, certain adhesion, or the deflection of the part will have memory and come back to its original shape rather than stretch and deform permanently. So 3D printing, you have what you all have probably seen, I would say is more common, is you have the spool of filament on top of the printer, and it's pushing plastic through a hot nozzle. That's called FDM, which is actually a trademark name, so the other name is FFF. Fused deposition modeling is FDM, but that one, I believe Stratasys owns the trademark on that name. So even though everyone in the industry is saying it, using it, no one's allowed to market or advertise with it, or they could get in trouble, but it's pretty much the standard name. But FFF, fused filament fabrication, if you hear that, FDM, FFF, they're the same thing. One's just protected, but you should know both because you'll hear people use them interchangeably. That is basically the plastic that goes through the hot nozzle and is deposited onto the build plate layer by layer by layer until it builds a 3D print. In this FDM, FFF filament type printing, you have PLA. Now, PLA is the easiest to print. It has the most colors. It's not very thermally stable, but if it's in an AC'd office in a house that's climate controlled, you don't have to worry about anything. If you keep your layouts in storage, but the storage is climate controlled, you don't have anything to worry about. But because the heat tolerance is around 140 degrees Fahrenheit, it can soften and deform. And if you have parts that, especially if you live in the South or you live anywhere, halfway down the U.S. into Texas, Arizona, Louisiana, like any of these places where it gets really hot in the summer, if you leave a part or leave a print or make something to put in your car over the summer, it'll probably soften and deform. So PLA being the easiest means you have an easier time creating your models, but they're less robust. They're not ideal for making things that you put outside or have any exposure to UV light, because UV tolerance is less and it can weaken, make the plastic brittle over time. The heat from the sun constantly bearing down on your print can make it weaker. So if you have modules that are in a garage and they sit in front of a window that doesn't have curtain or something, like this could be a problem for your PLA print. Or if you're transporting your prints in a tow behind trailer or in the back of an SUV, and it's during the summer and you're on your way to a show, the PLA printed parts could soften and deform. So just something to keep in mind. While it is the easiest to use, it also is the most susceptible to external environmental factors. So PETG is the next. And these names, these acronyms, I don't even want to try and tell you from memory what all of these stand for, but just know PLA, PETG, ABS, ASA, like these terms are what the names of the plastic are that you will be using typically in 3D printing. So PETG is kind of the all-arounder. It's a little less friendly to print with, mainly because it strings. So it's when it's hot, it's a little more stretchy, and you'll have little wisps that come out of the nozzle, and you can control the temperature and mess with settings and I've noticed by lowering the temperature on PETG, you get much better. Like, it makes the biggest impact, regardless of all the settings online that I've tried for everything. Lowering the temperature a little bit more has made the biggest difference. But PETG, it's a similar to what you, for water bottles that you're drinking. You buy a 24 pack of water from Costco or something. That's a similar plastic. It's basically the same plastic. It's just an additive for the 3D printing. That's what the G in PETG is for. It's the additive that they add to the plastic that you use for filament. So please don't go and make water bottles or any type of water bottles that you need to drink out of, because it's not the same. It's not food safe. So, but the PETG is 175 degrees Fahrenheit before it softens. So you have 30 more degrees. It's still kind of in the range of like the hottest summer in a black car with a black interior. Can mess with your prints, but for the most part, PETG is pretty stable. It's just you're going to have a little bit of issues with printing, with more cleanup on plastic hairs and wisps and things that stick off your prints. So keep that in mind. But while PETG is kind of a pain to print with from that side, it gives maybe better life or longer lasting life to your parts that you make. It has better UV stability. So people do use PETG to create things. If you want to also use your 3D printer for other things, and this is something I guess I didn't mention, but I should, is that your 3D printer not only can be good for your layouts and can be good for model railroading, but you need to also like think about other uses. Something breaks in your house, you can model up or find a model of a part and you can replace it same day. If they don't sell it online or it's an obscure part, if you want to make something silly, my kids, we make little planter boxes that they put little flowers in. And so I use 3D printing for about everything. It's not just like you're going to get this tool to only do model railroading stuff with. Like, you can legitimately use it for so many things. So when we start talking about the costs here in a little bit, like, just keep in mind that it has many uses. So if you need it for around the house, if you need it for your garage, if you need it for woodworking, there's guys that are using flush trim bits, and then they 3D print a jig basically to get a certain radius of a corner or to get a certain shape, and then they slide it to the corner of the wood and then use their trimmer with a flush bit, and now it's the same shape as the jig that they printed. So there's just all kinds of ways, so keep that in mind as well. But moving on, ABS ASA is one of the other common plastics that you'll see, but while they're closer to an industrial grade plastic, lawn furniture a lot of times made out of ABS in like huge injection molding machines. They have the highest heat tolerance, up to 220F, so they'll survive in your hot car no problem, and they have great UV stability. ASA having better stability than ABS, but they start to max out your printer's hot ends, although these generation of printers, they know people want hotter, like performance of the hot end to print hotter, so they can use more engineering grade materials. So this is slowly becoming a thing where you don't have to worry about, is your printer capable of ABS, ASA? But the thing is, it warps like a mother. Like, ABS and ASA, the bigger your part gets, the more prone it is to warping and delaminating and could cause some issues. But there are ways around that. And again, right, thinking about software, thinking about your model, right? How big do you need your model to be, or how small? What type of materials do you need? And what type of environment do they need to print correctly? And now looking at ASA, ABS, you can kind of start to put the pieces together that I need 220, and because it warps, if I print it in an enclosed printer, that's going to mitigate the warping, especially if it's an actively heated chamber and it has a heater in it that makes the ambient temperature rise because of the heater, not just from the heat bed and the nozzle and things that heat up. It'll make it so you can print ABS delightfully and not worry about like a cold draft because your AC kicked on, causing your print to warp and failing a print that's been going for 15 hours already, right? So these things are good to know before you select a printer. So this is on Pment. Not all filament are 100% equal, but Prusament's considered right now kind of the industry standard, mainly because Prusa's filament is monitored. You can scan a QR code and see the tolerances that they held to make your filament. And the thing is, they have some of the tightest tolerances in the industry. So when you think about your print coming out exactly with minimum defects, it's better if the raw material has a very, very tight tolerance. So these are things to think about, right? What do I buy in terms of like quality filament, or do I buy more affordable filament? And the kind of answer is, one, how tolerant are you to the visual aspect of your print? Are you willing to do more hands-on work with hand sanders and painting and fillers and things like that to beautify your print? Or do you want to try and get as close to pulling the print off and using different colors and printing it modularly, so that way the filament just is the right color and comes off and looks kind of how you want it to look? So if you want it to be like production quality, it's better to go with a high tolerance, very low tolerance. I said that right the first time. I apologize. Maintaining very high tight tolerances is the way to go with that. And Pment is kind of one of the industry leaders there on filament for sure, but it is a bit more expensive, as you can see. You're looking at like $31 for 2 kilograms, 2.2 pounds. 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds. But you also have to pay shipping, because the filament they're just starting a push to get filament in the US, but for the most part it comes from the Czech Republic. So you're going to have to pay, I think it's like $15 for 2 spools, but then the more it goes up, the more you pay for shipping. In contrast, Overture is one of the cheaper filament companies that I've used personally, and I use them regularly. But if you look at the prices, anywhere from $19 to $22, $23 for their filament, and I've actually had a really good time using Overture. What I will say is, I think what's more important than which filament you choose, I made the mistake of buying every filament under the sun. I bought cheap filaments, I bought in between, and I bought expensive filaments, and then I ended up having like 10 different, or more vendors, just different vendors with different types of filament. So, each vendor I'd have a PLA, a PETG, ASA, and I'm printing with all these different ones and then trying to combine like multiple colors from one vendor to the other. What I'll say, the rule of thumb here, the simplifying 3D printing, just note this one down. If you're going to do 3D printing and you're going to buy from a vendor, it's better that you just choose a vendor and you set your printer up, you set your temperatures and your speeds and your settings to make that manufacturer's printer run well. And then after you have that, you can buy other materials from the same vendor with little fear of something like, oh, the blue looks wonderful, but when it transitioned to red from this other vendor, I'm starting to get surface defects on the edges or something, right? Because while they claim to all use the same settings, the different additives that they use in colors, some guys on YouTube, the engineering-minded ones that are testing or finding even colors have an effect on this. So it'd be better mostly just pick a vendor, stick with the vendor, and that will eliminate a lot of headaches. As if you go into this, I recommend Overture. If you're budget friendly, if you have a little bit more room in your budget than Pment, you can't go wrong with that. And then you just stick with, I'm going to buy all the colors of this vendor and then use those together. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the printers themselves, because now that we know how the software works, what the software is saying our settings and needs are to produce this part with this type of plastic, we can start thinking about the printers. The Prusa MK4 kit is $800, and it's one of the things that there are fully assembled printers for the same price or less, and it takes 8 to 10 hours to build. Now, one of the marketing things that Prusa had was that if you build, and I agree, with your first printer, if you build your first printer, it's a wonderful thing to know it takes some time, but you learn what every component does on the machine. So you understand what your hot end is, and what your nozzle is, and on any of these printers, I would suggest potentially changing their nozzle. I don't believe I actually added to the slideshow, but the CHT from Bondtech nozzle is currently my favorite nozzle. Like, the ingenuity that these guys had for the price is probably the best nozzle on the market, in my opinion, in terms of like regular printing, not specialized printing, high flow. So any of these kits that can take a CHT nozzle, it's the best $20 you'll spend to upgrade your printer. But if you don't have 8 to 10 hours and you don't care to learn about the parts and you want something that you can kind of set and forget, Prusa does offer fully assembled for $1,100, and that is a lot of money. I honestly believe it myself. So if you look down, though, you can get an enclosure for an additional $350, and Prusa is kind of considered like the Mercedes, right, of 3D printing. And even though the chassis looks like the older chassis, the technology, like the components, things that you can't see, are higher quality than previous generations. So even though they maintain that original aesthetic, it actually is a very quality printer. So, but if you move on, there's some competitors coming in hot and heavy, like Bamboo Labs, their X1C, P1P, P1S, similar names for the same printer. There's like a premium one and then some stripped down versions. You want to get the Bamboo Labs P1S, in my opinion. It's the best balance between price, like affordability, and features. It's also enclosed, so you can do ABS, ASA, some of the harder nylon plastics, and have more success than if you had kind of the Cartesian, old school, open bed moves, nozzle moves type printers. So, and then Solval SV08, everybody's raving about this printer right now. It's $549. There's something called a Voron that they're saying that they knocked off. Or in most of these printers, to be honest, are kind of clones of other printers, and Prusa started that trend. That's kind of how the lore goes and the background goes. Basically, all these other companies are coming up making knockoffs of the Prusa printer. So they were kind of the original, but now some people are investing in engineering and coming up with some really crazy stuff. So Solval for $549, Creality K1 for $429. The Creality is the most affordable, but I had my nephew pick one up, and he's been having some issues, but when it works great. But when there's an issue, it is kind of a pain. And Creality's been known to have kind of hit or miss on their quality, but they are good printers if you get one that was built wonderfully, and especially at the price level. So here's some photos of the MK4, the P1S, the SV08, and the K1. Any printer on this screen, I would bless and say you can use them and they'll be wonderful. So material type, we're going to move to resin real quick, talking about the resin. So FDM, the plastic type, it has some issues where thin parts that are tall and long, it's layer adhesion, it can snap. So anything the Z height up and down can break. But with the resin printers, your material types are, we call isotropic. In all directions, they can snap, shatter, break. They're strong very similarly in all directions. But you get the most affordable, the model class resins are the most affordable, but usually the lowest strength, most brittle. The engineering class resins, the resins have a bigger library for material properties. And then you have specialty resins that are flexible and you can mix some. But resins are cured with UV. They're thermoset materials, so more light introduced to your part can cause them to keep curing and get brittle and over time have an issue. So you're going to want to paint and coat resin prints if you do it. But the one thing I want you to remember is that I have it in bold here. This is by far the messiest of all the printers, and there's still debate on how much of a problem it is to get resin on your skin and in your skin. You know, use soap, not IPA for the resin to clean it off. It is a thermoset, so if you get resin on your skin and you walk in front of a window and the sunlight hits it, that can be a problem and cause not a huge burn, but it'll get hot and you'll feel it, and you can usually wipe it off before it causes any kind of problem. But if you're not quick, it can burn your skin, so something to keep in mind. Sarai Tech flexible resins. what people have been doing, they take this resin and they take the engineering tough resin. You want to do some kind of combination, like 10%, 15% of the flex to the tough resin. Reason being, no matter how strong a resin is, when you guys are printing things for HO or N scale or smaller, they're going to be so thin they might break. So what you do is you make the resin more flexible, so that way those features bend, not break. One thing for the printers, so looking at the printer prices, they seem a little cheaper here than some of the better quality FDM. And again, there's all these $150, $200 printers. You get what you pay for. I had a buy once, cry once thing on there that I think I skipped. Don't buy the bottom of the barrel printers. It's not worth it. Just save yourself some time. Pay the extra $200 or $300. Get a good printer. It's gonna be worth it. I promise. It just all I have to say about that. But recently, Saturn put out an Ultra 4 $400 printer. This is my top choice. I just impulse bought 2 of them. They basically created one of my favorite printers from Prusa. That was a $2,000 printer, and they made it $400. So it has many of the same features. It's larger. It's like all the things I wanted the Prusa printer to be, and it's like 20% of the price. But the Prusa printer was also already established, right? You pay money to get certifications for medical, dental, things like that, and that's part of what drives the price up. This one, they just said, hey, let's send it out to the masses and let the tabletop guys use it. But they put all the mechanical features in there, so I've got 2 on the way, and I can't wait to get them. I already own a Sonic Mighty 8K, and with Resin right now, you want to look at the screen that they use, the HD of the screen, and that's going to give you that better resolution, especially as your prints get much smaller. So I would say whatever the K is, I do 4K minimum, but 8 to 12K if you're going to do like N scale type stuff, something to think about. So Creality, Anycube, some of these other companies do have cheap printers, but like I said, buy once, cry once. I've had not good issues or not good things to say about some of their FDM printers. So I never tried their resin printers. But you also, on top of the printer, even though the printer's like $400 for the new Saturn, you need a wash and cure station as well. So these are what the printers look like in the new Saturn Ultra on the left that they made, and then the cheap Creality on the right. And then the Frozen, I have that one. It's $650, but it's wonderful. It makes good parts. So what are we going to do with this information? Make sure that if it's an FDM printer, it has auto bed leveling. You're going to go buy an FDM printer no matter what you do. It's coming standard now, but if you're going to buy a cheap one and you're not going to listen to buy the 400 or 500 plus printers, just make sure it has auto bed leveling is the one thing. But then also make sure that in your slicer, and why you should have the slicer, if I'm going to buy some 10 log printer that no one's ever heard of, but someone did a review of, go into the slicer, make sure there's a profile. If there's no profile, it's be a nightmare to create your own profile specifically for that printer. And then, you need to buy your material based on your project needs. So do I need resin because it's small and brittle and I need flexibility and strength, or can I get away with FDM because I'm making buildings and houses and bridges, right? So pick your printer, pick your material, but some other things that you're going to need to get started, and I'm just going to break them down. I have a list here. Good snips, 91% or better isopropyl. There's additives in like the 70% and below that can cause your build plate to get slimy or not stick and have some issues. Crafter's spade, this little spatula looking thing here, it's wonderful for cleaning up like these extrusion lines that they put and brims and whatever. It's just game changer. Buy it. It's worth the $5. Deburring tool to clean up the edges of your prints. So you will get sometimes little pieces of plastic that stick, or some support broke off, or some little things happen. So get the deburring tool. But with all of these things on this list, it's like $650 to $700 all in to start FDM printing. For resin printing, again, $400 to $650 for a good printer. But they do have smaller build volumes. Now, you can get an 8K printer or a 4K printer, much smaller. So if you're only making like deer and jaguars and small cars or whatever, barrels for docks, you can get away with a smaller printer. But you might have problems building larger parts. So something to think about. If you want the capability of both, pay the extra $200, get the Saturn, the new Saturn, and from Elegoo, get the new Saturn from Elegoo, and get the build volume, or pay the $650 for the Frozen, tried and true brand. But again, crafter spade, deburring tool, and your snips, isopropyl, you want 99% or more for resin printing. The other thing is the wash station is going to be about $150. You can find them for 100, 150, and then this little scraper utility knife can get underneath your prints and pop them off. So last couple things, and then my presentation is just about over. You're going to get, if you have a Dremel tool, I assume you all have them. You need to get these things right here. So these little like Scotch-Brite looking balls took me forever hand sanding supports off of resin prints. It was a pain in my ass, all the different nooks and crannies and whatever. Throw this little buffer pads on your Dremel tool and just quickly go over all of them. It just knocks them all off, and it doesn't hurt, and it has some flexibility. If you push a little harder or softer, it doesn't eat into your print. So a wonderful thing to have. Costco size box of gloves, no kidding. You're going to take them on and off and waste a bunch of gloves because resin gets on everything. You don't want to touch your printer. You don't want to touch your tools if you have resin on your hands. Go to Florida Labs. Pick up IPA from Florida Labs, 99% by the gallon, and it's like the cheapest for the volume that you get. In your wash station, you might have to use like 3/4 of a gallon in your wash station. Then it evaporates over time. So something to think about, but that's the place to get it. But all in all, oh yeah, all the paper towels, like Costco in bulk, tons of paper towels, but $800 should be realistic for getting started with resin printing. So we kind of touched on everything here, the material types, the printer types, the everything to think about overall. But just kind of a little roundup here. You want to get your slicer, get your file, or create your file. Be able to design, have a printer that's capable of what type of plastic. Do I build something that goes around something that's hot? I need ABS. And so I need a printer that's capable of doing it. So it's kind of slicer, model, printer, and then finding best settings for what you have, and your life will be easy. So do we have any questions, or how do we do this?
You have many questions.
Okay.
You have told people that there are FF something or FDM and PLA printers, right? SLA printers. So we'll skip that question. Are there different slicers, or do you need different slicers for the different kinds of material that you're printing?
There are, but it depends. So with Prusa, their slicer can do both because they have printers themselves for resin and the FDM type. But there are slicers like Lychee Slicer and Shitu Box, which are resin only, from what I understand. Resin only. That's all I use them for is resin. And then Form Labs, they have, this is more industrial. I don't expect anybody to buy these, but if you have the money to buy that and you just want to show off, then that's by all means, you can do that. They do resin and SLS nylon powder, but their software does both.
Okay. So here's an important question. I use the Lychee Slicer and the Shitu Box as my slicers, and notice that there are some added or different functionality between them. Is there one that is robust or use more than the other?
I use Shitu Box myself, and it does what I need. And so what I would say is if you've used both of them, look at the things that you design, look at the machines you have, and just pick whichever one has the most relevant settings for you.
Okay. Then on to the FDM printers. Any insight on a heated bed or not?
Yeah, so mostly heated bed. There's only like a few types of filaments that might not use a heated bed, or certain processes that you might not use a heated bed for. But heated bed is important for any plastic we talked about today. You need heated bed. But the chamber is what I think would be more important, enclosed or not enclosed, so you can print more warping plastics easier.
And how about flex plates?
Yeah, 100%. I should have had that. I'm glad whoever asked that question. Thank you. I have a big old scar on my palm of my hand or pad of my hand because I wasn't using a flex plate, and after I sliced my hand open, I 100% flex plates on everything, including my resin printers.
That was the real question: is how about resin printers?
Yeah, so you can do flex plates on resin printers. Wham Bam has some resin settings or resin kits to put like a magnetic 3M sheet and then a flex plate. The only thing is every once in a while, if you want to print direct to the plate, if you have a bunch of parts on it, they can actually pull the resin plate up and it slides or can shift. And I've had that happen in the past. So yes, use them, but in my presentation there was like that window scraper with, oh my gosh, I didn't know about that until I went to work for the VA and I found out they were using it for their resin printers. And I don't need the flex plate so much, but there's always that danger that I'm very careful. These, get sorry hands over here. But if you use that, then the flex plate is not necessary.
So can you quickly explain what the flex plates are?
Yes, so it's a spring steel sheet. Might be coated, might not be, might be laser etched, but basically on your printer, the print sticks either top down for resin printing or bottom up for FDM printing. But when your print's done, you pull the sheet, and I have them like right over there, but you can bend. So basically, like if I have the sheet of paper, I have this thing, pop it, and then the print pops off. It peels rather than having to get something underneath the edge. Like if you're printing on glass, which is a lot of printers come with that still, you have to overcome that adhesion to the glass.
Okay, when creating my 3D prints for my when creating my 3D prints, scale details matter. I have a 4K and 8K printer. What resin should I use for the highest detail that isn't too brittle?
Okay, so something I could have put in here too, and I was contemplating. I would say use an engineering resin, but it's not the resin as much on the scale being correct as it is the translucency of the resin. So light bleeds. So if you have a clear resin, your settings to dial them in, there might be more light bleed than if you're using a colored resin because it will block a fair amount of that. So that's most important. But if you can use something like a Soraya Blue, they have a Soraya Blue clear. It's confusing. Blue is the product type. Clear is the color. But it's a tough engineering resin, and they sell UV dyes that you can buy for cheap, and you can dye to add a color to it to block, but also give you maybe a base. Like I need a certain color, like brown for a wooden bridge or something, or a dock, and you can make it brown. And so less light goes through, you have better tolerances, and then dialing in the light settings is going to help too.
Okay, so last question.
Okay.
I buy the printer. It shows up in a box.
Yes.
Black Friday sale.
Perfect time to buy them.
Christmas, I have it almost unboxed. By New Year, it comes out of the box. By Valentine's Day, I go, what shall I print?
Let's go. Yeah, all right.
So what should I print first when I take the printer out of the box?
I think something fun. Something that you want to exist that doesn't exist because you're going to have the most motivation for actually doing the project. So I would say pick something that matters to you, is meaningful, that you've always wished you could play with or hold, or something from a show, like a replica of something, or something for your module or layout. Start there, and then as your prints fail, because they will fail, because you have to learn is there a learning curve to this? Start looking up reasons why, and slice orientation and all these things matter. And I'll be trying to do more on my YouTube channel about orientation of slicers and all these questions that you guys have. Hey, I've got the printer, now what? But I would say just something fun, something enjoyable. Printing can be frustrating, like any tool, if it doesn't function right, and it could be typically user error. But as you learn, it gets easier and more fun.
Cool. Thank you, Logan.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I think that will help a lot of people get to the basics before the basics.
Yeah.
To be a lot less stressed about the whole world of 3D printing, because it is another hobby within the hobby.
For sure.
And if Martin comes on, we can talk about rabbit holes. So thank you very, very much.
I appreciate it.
We will see everybody again. Oops, what did the where did the sheet go? It will be June the 29th will be the fourth Saturday. There's Martin. Martin, tell us, have you had
But
a
I
3D
heard
printer rabbit hole yet?
well, I did. I bought a 3D printer about 8-9 years ago, and I think I printed 3 things with it, and it's gathered dust in the corner of the crane room since then. So
There you go. So you felt when I had my story about meeting people that they bought the printer and it just ended up on the sidelines for a year or two or more.
well, I figured once I got hold of the printer, I realized you've got to do some design. So we've got to go down the rabbit hole now of design software and learning how to use that software and all that. And you know, I'm known as Squirrel down here, and something else shiny ran past me, and that was it. I was off down another rabbit hole, and that one got left behind. So
Well, yeah, the cool thing these days, the repositories are getting bigger and bigger, and there's a land grab right now from all the vendors to
yep.
get more people sharing more files so people will buy their printers. So
Okay.
we're getting more stuff every day.
In the beginning, people always complained about how long it takes. It takes
This is
8
true.
hours to print, and I was like, what about the 80 hours you spent making it, right?
Yeah. Well, here's the other thing people don't think about. What if I need to buy something that's custom made from a vendor? How long is that going to take? What if I need to buy something that's on back order for 2 weeks? What if I need to buy something that's going to take 3-day shipping or 5-day ground shipping? So when you think about it from that perspective, 8, 16, 24 hours of a friend that just got into printing, he was complaining. I'm like, but think about it. If you went and ordered that part, this print will still beat that part.
Yes.
So it depends, right? It depends.
Cool. Thank you, guys. See you on the 29th.
Hey, all right. See ya. Thanks for having me.